tape is about survivor notification, notification of the death of a child. My daughter, Heidi Horsley, and I realize that this is a very traumatic thing for anybody who has to go to the scene of an accident or to tell a family that they've had a child die. Our first interview, this videotape is done with people who have received survivor notification of a child, and we appreciate them being on this video to let you know what their thoughts are on this sensitive topic. Our first guest on the survivor notification, Jill Kraft Thompson, has written a book called Finding Jill. She lost 5 family members in a tragic accident in Italy, 2 children, her mother, her husband, her niece, and we wanted to ask Jill quickly about this experience. Jill, how did you receive notification?
It was my husband's boss that ended up telling me. He handed me the phone, and my sister that was back in Utah was on the other line, I believe. When she was talking, she couldn't get it out and handed it over to my brother.
And where were you?
I was in the hospital bed.
Okay, you were in a hospital bed and somebody came and told you. What was your thought at that time? Would you want to receive it over the phone? Was somebody with you?
I don't know that there would ever be a good time to tell someone that. And you're in such shock that the words are just words. For me, I heard what he was saying and what my siblings were saying on the other end, but I didn't really understand the magnitude. I didn't feel it yet. It took me a few moments for that to all compute and make sense of what they were saying. So.
And what about receiving it on the phone?
With receiving it on the phone, I don't believe I had a choice.
You were in Italy and everybody was dead and they had to tell you. Now,
Yeah.
did the police in Italy come to you at any time?
At that time, no. A few days after the accident, everybody thought, I kept asking, where is my vase? My husband and I had just bought it for our 9-year anniversary. And the police officers brought it to Bart's boss, who's one of my best friends, and he said it shattered. And Wayne said, I'm just going to open it anyway. And he opened it and it was still intact. So that police officer and Wayne, I'm pretty sure, hugged at that time.
Okay, and what about the police? Did they have to interview you about the accident before you left Italy?
No, not that I recall.
Okay, did you want to see the accident site?
I didn't have the ability to. I was still too injured.
So have you ever gone to see it?
I was in that area one time with my attorney, and I will never go back that I know of to Bologna, Italy. I think it's a beautiful place. I just don't have good memories.
But did you go to the site with your attorney or no?
I didn't know where that site was.
Okay, so you didn't choose to really track it down
I could
and go to the
imagine
site.
I would want to if I lived in the States, and I have been curious at times in my life, but that's quite a plane ride.
And did you see the bodies?
Only 2 bodies were open, and I did not.
Okay, and you chose not to.
I chose not to. I had other deaths in my life, and the ones that I had seen that had been dead, I wasn't able to recall them in their living state. I only could recall them in their death, and so I didn't want to experience that with my family.
Thank you very much for doing this video for us. I know it's going to be important for people to hear.
Thank you for having me.
Our second guest today is Barbara Allen, and we are talking to her today about how she was notified about her son's death in 2003. Her son Jim died of a heroin overdose. So Barb, can you tell us a little bit about how you were notified that Jim had died?
It was really harsh. I got a phone call. I was living in where I do in Maryland, and my son had relocated back to our hometown in Phoenix. And I got a phone call that a body had been found, and they thought it might be Jim. And I was to call this funeral home, and I did.
And who called you? Do you know?
It was my brother.
Okay.
There had been a notification in the paper, and some things had been going on, but nobody had the information. This had been my worst nightmare, that this could happen. And I called the.
What time was it?
It was 3:15
In
in the afternoon.
in the afternoon.
It was a gorgeous March day,
Okay.
and it was March 27th, 2003. I had talked to my son 2 weeks before on a beautiful March day, and he was great. I called the funeral home in Phoenix, and the woman was very, very kind, but very hesitant. And I said, just tell me what you need to know. And she asked me for identifying marks, which I gave her, Social Security number, which I gave her, and then she just very, quietly said, well, I'm sorry to tell you this, but we have your son.
Oh, his body was there.
And that was it. And to me, it was like, okay, I'm the kind of person that goes into what do I do next mode. And started making arrangements, and I told her exactly what I wanted her to do at this point, and I'm starting to make my lists of who to notify and what I wanted to do.
Okay. So how would you like people to come to your house? I mean, how did you feel about receiving the news on the phone?
Well, given that it was a distance, that I was in Maryland and Jimmy was in Phoenix, I wasn't sure that anybody would have come to Maryland or called a Maryland police officer, for example, to notify me. Certainly.
Would you have liked that?
I've had friends that lost their children in military deaths, and it's so helpful that somebody did come and talk to them one-on-one.
Right.
And so I believe that might have been an advantage, but when I got to Phoenix, and because that's my hometown, it would have been helpful to me if the police had reached out to me.
Right.
But I did feel, and I believe it's because of how he died, that it was like they washed their hands of it. There was no outreach to me. I called the police. I found out who had his casework, and they gave me some information. It was very difficult to find somebody to talk to. Very dismissive of the situation, and I knew there was some legal things that he needed to clear. I needed to clear up in his name, and I had to work really hard to find out who to talk to, how to do that.
So you didn't feel supported by the police at that time?
No.
All right. Thank you.
I didn't.
Thank you so much for being on and talking about this.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Barb.
Swap out.
Thank you, darling.
Yeah.
I've been summoned.
Our next guest is Dave Roberts. Hi, Dave.
Hey, Laura.
Now, your daughter Janine died of cancer,
Yes.
right? And I wondered, how were you notified?
Well, there's a couple of different stages of this.
I really believe that I was notified of her death before she actually died. We had gone for a consult. She had a very rare form of cancer. It was a sarcoma.
And she was only 18, right?
She was only 18 years old. And she was stage 4 at the time of diagnosis, and it had metastasized to her bone marrow and her lymph nodes. And so essentially she was terminal at the time of diagnosis. But we went for a consult, and we drove several hundred miles, and after a 5-minute consult, the oncologist, I'll never forget her words, said there is no cure for the cancer that she has. The only hope we have for your daughter is that if we do aggressive chemotherapy and hope their cancer goes into remission until we could find a cure. So at that particular moment, my daughter knew, and I knew, that the likelihood of her not being long for this earth
How
was very
did you
high.
feel that the news was delivered? Was it all right, or what would you have liked?
I would have liked, I think, Gloria, some time to process the information. I would have liked to have an opportunity for time to have some questions, maybe, talk about treatment alternatives, what we could do to at least extend quality of life. We got the news, and the oncologist simply walked out to let us process it, and quite frankly, to get that kind of news, I mean, put my entire family in shock.
Right.
And I just had a lot of unanswered questions that I
So
didn't
it's
really have an
important for
opportunity
people
to
to
ask.
be available for questions and answers. What about when she actually died? Were you there? And And so you were there at
Yep.
the moment, and they said she's dead.
Yeah, well, what happened is that we had hospice services. Janine had opted to terminate service about 10 days actually before she died. And, she had opted to die at home. And so what happened is I was sleeping and my sister-in-law came in to get me. And she said, it's time.
Wow.
And so I went, I held my daughter's hand, she took 2 breaths and she died. And it's, the way I look at it now is, I look at it, in the beginning I looked at it as I was the last person to see her alive, but now I look at it as being the first person to usher her into her new existence.
And what did you need after that, if someone was to be with somebody who's had a sudden death?
What would I need? I would probably, again, in my daughter's case, just have the opportunity to ask questions about her diagnosis. And what I actually needed at that point, at the time of her death, I got a lot of support from the hospice folks. Were great. In fact, their treatment of my daughter motivated me to become a volunteer for them.
What's the number one thing they did for you at that moment? Do you remember?
They put a hand on my shoulder.
Okay, I like that.
So
They put
they
a
were
hand on-
there giving you
There's support.
Physical support.
physically and
Yep.
emotionally.
And the other thing that they also did is they did follow-up phone calls as well too, which is what we needed. They would call periodically to see how the family was holding up, what we needed. And so that kind of support, I think initially, even beyond the first year, is important, just so the families are not forgotten, our children are not forgotten. And hospice really, in all of the darkness with what had happened with Janine's death, they were a beacon of light in terms of what our oncologists didn't do.
Right. Well,
They
thank you.
provided. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dave.
Thank you.